It's a bit of a somber day today. This morning, Russia invaded the Ukraine and threw the world economic markets and the world political system into turmoil. And who knows how it'll unfold over the next days, weeks, months, or even years. But at the heart of it all, I really feel for the people of Ukraine who just want peace and are now on the run and just trying to stay alive and survive. And it's a really tough time right now. And it just reminds me that we really need to appreciate the things in life that matter most, our loved ones and our families. And that's why pandemic parenting is going to keep being here and keep providing you the best advice on parenting, especially in these difficult times like the pandemic and potentially this wartime now with Ukraine and Russia, and who knows what's going to happen with all that. So even in the toughest times, I have a great guest for you today, and her name is Christine Furman, and she's going to talk about how to bring fun into learning and into the family. And again, on a day-to-day like today, it can be tough to think about, well, how can we have fun? But fun is still an important part of life. And even in moments like this, we need to know how to have fun at home and with our families, to really instill that joyful presence in our kids and help them to grow to be emotionally mature adults. So today we'll be talking with Christine, and she's going to just be sharing a lot about her EduPlay system and her curriculum. And I'm really excited because I am a big believer in having fun while learning. I think when people are learning, that's when they're having when they're learning and having fun, that's when they're learning the best. So I really love what Christine is doing, and I think her work is really important, and you should definitely try and incorporate it into your own families and your own children's learning. So without further ado, let's get to the interview with Christine. All right. Hello and welcome to Pandemic Parenting. I'd like to welcome Christine Furman today, and she is the CEO of Momspiration 412 and the founder of EduPlay Learning. Christine, welcome to Pandemic Parenting.
Thank you, Greg, so much. I'm so honored to be here today.
I know, I just got this new whole mic setup, so it's kind of like in my face. So we're experimenting, trying to up the production value of the show a little bit.
I love it. I love it.
Well, it's a pleasure having you on. I know you're really big into the learning through fun and learning through play, which is something I am really, really a strong proponent of as well. And so I know you also have a little background in special education. So I was just wondering if you could just kind of walk us through your journey of your background in special education, then how you ended up creating EduPlay curriculum and the philosophy.
Yes, absolutely. So I am a elementary and special education teacher by trade. I worked in the classroom setting for about 10 years and really had a lot of growth when I taught life skills in the special education department. And it was during that time that I was teaching kids of all ages and abilities, but I was still trying to teach the same concept to those kids. So it was, a lot of creativity and energy and enthusiasm to get the kids excited about what we were learning and make it relatable for them. So I had kids ages, for ages, middle school ages, right? But ability level, kindergarten through about second grade. So I'm trying to take these concepts and make sure that it's relatable for them and something that they could use to apply to their life later on. And I really found that doing a variety of learning, multi-sensory kind of learning, where we're learning through games and interactive activities and real life experiences, was how they thrived. And I was seeing so much success. And so then I love that. I loved working with those children. I saw a lot of progress in their education and in their, social skills as well. I had many coworkers come to me and say, Christine, your class is the most well-behaved, best manners. And I was like, yes, I must be onto something, right? So fast forward a few years, I had my two beautiful children, and I said, you know what? It's just on my heart to always be home with them, and I wanted to find a way to combine both of those passions, to combine my love for teaching and learning and helping families around the world while also raising my children and being home with them. So I, talked to a lot of families, and they said, you know what, Christine, like, there is no place for us to come together and just know that we're not alone on this journey of parenthood. And so I started a community. I started Momspiration 412, and it was a Pittsburgh based group. And we had Momspiration meetups. So we would get together, and I would provide a space, a safe space for these families to come together. And it was just allowing them to know, like, they're not alone. They have support, they have resources. But then that educator in me was like, there's more to everyone coming together, because another component of that is you have all the parents together. What are the kids doing? So my education piece came in, and I started creating a curriculum. So that's where EduPlay came in, that when we had these meetups, we were then able to be educating the kids. I was educating the kids through themed activities and using that multi-sensory learning that I, taught. And I was helping these families to be able to connect with their kids. And, I was teaching their kids all kind of useful things. Mm-hmm. And it just has continued to grow. And during the pandemic, a lot of families were just searching for something to do with their kids. Because I myself, my daughter was in preschool, and they just shut down the preschools. So there was nothing. And I was friends with a lot of the preschool parents. So I started just going live in my Facebook group, and we would do calendar, we would sing songs, we would read a story, and I would give them just an activity to do throughout the day. So they had something to hold on to. And it was then during that time, then it all turned worldwide. I had families from all over the world join this group, my Momspiration group, looking for resources. So, and now it's turned into a complete curriculum and a worldwide community.
That's incredible. I really resonate with that, because that's kind of what like pandemic parenting was all about, right? So I had a woman reach out to me, and she's saying there's tons of parents in my list that like are reaching out and they don't know what to do during the pandemic. And she's like, I like your energy, you should start a show. And so I was like, okay. And
here it is. I love it.
And like part of it is like I am learning as I get older how important community is, and just like being able to share experiences with other people that are going through the same thing. It just really helps for me to be like, oh, I'm not alone out there. So, right. I'm trying to create that with pandemic parenting as well.
Well, you're doing a great job. This is an awesome platform for parents and a great resource. So kudos to you.
Thank you. And I was also curious, you mentioned that like you started introducing all these multi-sensory kind of learning styles, and then you also noticed that like the social behavior, everyone kind of improved. Have you like made a connection between the multi-sensory stuff and the better social behavior? Is there a connection?
Absolutely. I mean, I see that a lot in my own children, because we are learning in multiple different ways. And I am teaching them, when we go outside, or I'm teaching them when we are anywhere. I mean, it could be any place that we're at. It's always a learning experience. And that's something that was huge for me, that we see each moment as a chance to learn, because everything that we do is an opportunity to teach them. My son, even this morning, asked me about my contacts and putting my contacts in. And instead of just brushing him to the side, oh, I'll just teach you later, or you'll know when I invited them in, and I said, hey, look at this. This is what I do. And we clean it out. And, and I walk them through the process. They were intrigued. And when they were done, they walked away. And and that was okay, because they're able to absorb what they can, and they're going to continue to grow and build on that. And that is something that's huge for me, is that our kids are sponges, that they are learning absolutely everything that we put to them, and we expose them to. And so I was very, very intentional with the type of shows that they were watching, or the type of music that even I was listening to in the car, or when I was, cleaning the house, making sure that it's something that I want them to be listening to and, is positive for them. And that has also then transferred to just their manners. They're more polite, and their behaviors, they're able to understand it because I explain it to them. Well, why do we have to behave this way? Well, here are the expectations of what we're doing. We are going to go to church. Well, we have to behave, and we have to sit, and we have to be quiet, because those are the expectations. So really just giving them and telling them what's next has really helped them, I believe, to prepare them for the situations that they come into.
I like that, because I think personally I wouldn't make that connection between like explaining the processes of things to your children and then them being betterly socially behaved. So thank you for sharing that connection.
Yes.
And you may have touched it on a little bit just there, but so you created this worldwide community, and you created this curriculum called EduPlay. Could you explain a little bit more about exactly what EduPlay is and its components and your philosophy?
Yes, absolutely. So as I was teaching, I was realizing that I was creating this curriculum, right? Like it was kind of I just was dabbling, coming up with an activity for the kids to learn some reading skills, or maybe a few words, or we're going to count, with this heart game, or we're going to do a heart hop, and then it started to build into this bigger curriculum than I even realized. And before I knew it, I was coming up with stories for the kids. I was coming up with letter activities for them to be not only identifying, but also writing. And then it just continues to build and lead into this much bigger picture and curriculum that can serve children of all ages and abilities. And it also involves movement. Movement's huge for me, to really get your kids outside, to get them on a walk or yoga, or, really get that energy that they have. They're full of energy, and, just using it in the appropriate ways. And I also include a recipe for each of my topics, because bringing the kids into the kitchen is a great way for them to learn not only the life skills of being in the kitchen, of learning how to cook, but also there's so much math, there's so much reading, there's so much science that you can incorporate into all of those things just while you're having fun in the kitchen. And that's what it's all about. It's all about having fun. So it's, learning, it's creating, and most of all, it's having fun while we do that. So it's helping the parents also to see, how can I teach my kids this specific topic and make it fun? How can I teach my kid about time without saying, well, this is the hour hand, this is the minute hand, but how can we have fun with it? And that's what EduPlay is all about. It's that educational play.
Awesome. Yeah. When I was a school teacher, I started being a school teacher, and then we went into the pandemic, and then everything went online. And I was like, well, how can I try and re-engage these kids when they're going to be at home and they're not going to be in the classroom? So I was a math teacher, and I created this game called Mathlandia, where these kids could create an avatar, and then they could like earn points by doing homework or performing well on tests, or taking good notes, and then they could spend their experience points to like get a new sword or a new tunic or whatever, or they could buy like a homework pass or bonus points on the test. And it was just a way for them to just get more involved and have fun and have and a game. Because I look at like, where do kids spend their time? They spend all their time playing games. I know I did when I was young. Like I played video games all the time, and because that's what's fun. So trying to gamify things, I think, is really a powerful tool for learning.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that what you created for them, because that's what it's all about. It's being relatable for them. How can what I'm doing be relatable
Mhm.
to what is the big picture, And it's a simple topic that I was teaching my daughter today. And it was something that last week she wasn't getting. And today it was just like, how can I explain this in a different way? And today it made sense. I used money, and that was something that was relatable to her. And she was able to grasp the skill so much easier. So it's finding what works for that specific child, because it's going to be different for everyone.
100%. Yeah. And I feel as a teacher, like that's my responsibility, is how can I communicate what's in my brain into their brain so that they understand it, not trying to force them to understand it the way I understand it, but trying to get them
Absolutely.
to understand it the way they want to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now it's time for another Deep Thoughts with Greg. See, we like to have fun on the show. And what I'm thinking about today is active learning versus passive learning. So I've noticed a lot of times with my students, I'll ask them, "Oh, what did you learn in school today?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know." Like they just like dismiss it out of hand right away. And then I'm like, "All right, well, what classes did you take today?" And they're like, "I took math." And I'm like, "All right, what's one thing you learned in math class? One thing you learned in math class?" And a lot of times they're still like, "Oh, I don't know." And that's because it's just they're used to just having knowledge kind of given to them when they're in school, and this type of passive learning. So just kind of like in one ear, out the other. That's why I think it's so important to actually ask them the question, what did you learn today? Or how can you apply that knowledge? Or what's useful about learning that? And then it actually starts getting them actively engaged with the knowledge, right? So like now their brain has to think of a way to like a story to incorporate that knowledge into their own lives. Whereas before it was just like knowledge being received, all right, whatever, discarded. But if you're like, well, what did you learn? How does that apply? How is it useful? Now they actually have to stop and think. And they may be like, it's not useful. And that's fine too. And you can ask them like, what did you learn in math class? And maybe the thing that they learned isn't even about math. Maybe they learned that they don't like the way their teacher's voice sounds. You can be like, oh, well, what do you think it is about your teacher's voice that, irritates you? Or someone in math class did this thing and it really upset them. Oh, why do you think that was upsetting for you? Like just getting them, again, like we talked with Christine about how kids are always learning, and especially young kids, they're absorbing everything like a sponge. And it's not just kids though, like all people are learning all the time. We're always learning. And so these like little questions of getting your kids engaged, more active learning, like why do you think that happened? Because they're usually the ones asking you why, right? And that's great, so you can explain to them, but then you can turn it back on them. Well, why do you think? What do you think? Maybe they went to geography class and they learned that about the Roman Empire, and you're like, why do you think it was the Roman Empire that came to power, and why not the Greeks? Why didn't they become like the ultimate empire over the Romans instead? What do you think? What do you think life would have been like? How would life be different? You could come up with hypotheticals. How do you think life would be different if the Greek Empire ended up ruling instead of the Roman Empire? So these are just like some ideas that I'm just spitballing, but the important thing is just to really start trying to get your kids to actively engage with this knowledge, right? Ask them questions, ask them why questions, ask them hypothetical questions, ask them questions, how is it useful? How does it apply in your life, in our lives as a family? And they may not always have an answer, but the really cool thing is at least we'll start getting the cogs turning a little bit and having them trying to think of ways and start incorporating that knowledge into their own stories in their brain. And that's really going to help anchor that knowledge and expand their views, and teaching them how to work with that knowledge and actually use that knowledge as tools. Because what good is knowledge unless you're using it as a tool? So that's my deep thought for today: active learning versus passive learning. So a lot of times we can just be passive learners, and it's not necessarily useful just to have knowledge flow in and flow out. We actually want to try active learning like anchor that knowledge into our brains. So try it out. Engage your kids with questions like that and see how that really turns their brain on. And now we're going to get back with Christine, and she's going to start talking about more about EduPlay and really how to have fun and bring that kind of fun into the family and actively engage your kids every single day with this kind of fun, engaging play. So let's get back into it. Yeah, and we just were talking about how I'm also a big proponent of having fun in the classroom, having fun while learning. So why do you think fun is such an integral part of learning?
I do. I think it's so important because I think that when they are having fun, they don't even know that they're learning, you know? Like we can be playing a game and it's an addition game and they're adding, and I'll give you an example. Our whole family has been playing this game called Sleeping Queens. It's a new game. It's like a card game, but there's adding in there. There's strategy in there, you know? So even though they're looking at it as family quality time, because that's what I looked at it as first, you know, it was quality time as a family to sit down and play this card game. But what they're now doing is they have to strategize. They have to add points up. They have to count by tens. They have to count by fives. And now that family time that we had, they are doing that on their own. In the morning when they wake up, they're like, can we play Sleeping Queens? And they play that on their own when they wake up. And it is just so awesome to see that they are excited to learn. And they don't even know it. I mean, they don't even realize how much they're actually learning by doing that. And that's the same thing whenever we're in the kitchen and I'm just having a conversation with them and I'm saying, okay, well, a fraction or, this measurement or whatever it may be, they're not even realizing that this is learning, that word school. When I say, all right, it's time to do our school because I homeschool my children, they're like, oh, I don't want to do school. But when I say, oh, it's time to play this game, that's what they're excited for, So I have to remember it's not just school, it's fun, it's exciting. And I feel like that word just gets such a bad rap, like, oh, I gotta go to school. Like, yeah, it's all about having fun, Yeah.
And it's funny how if you just reframe it, because like if your kids are like, oh, school's boring, you just like, well, we're gonna play a game instead, and then you just do the exact same thing you're gonna do anyway, but now they're into it,
right.
So you're just giving some great examples of how you do it in your life, and I'm just wondering if parents want to be deliberate about adding fun and incorporating these types of things, how could they go about? What are some ways they could make things more fun and include their kids in their lives?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So one of the things that I've realized is there's so many opportunities for these pockets of learning that sometimes as parents we miss because we are always so busy. We're busy going to the next appointment, or we're busy getting our work done, or we're busy rushing out the door because we got to get to school, or whatever it may be. We are busy. We are busy people. We have a lot on our plates. But there's also these small pockets that we can use as an educational piece, such as when you're driving to school, you could have a conversation with your child. So when my kids were littler, it was, how do you spell your name? And we'd be in the car and we'd be shouting and singing, but we'd be spelling their name. So they're learning, And then it turned into, well, what's my phone number? And we started practicing saying my number, because at this point, they are with you in that car and they got nowhere to go, right?
Captive audience.
Right. So, it's really being intentional about turning off the devices, about turning off the TV. Our TV is only on for a certain amount of time, and they know that they have a limited amount of time for that. It's not on 24/7. And at that point, then it becomes a reward. When they get to watch their show, oh, mommy's going to go do her work, I'm going to get to watch a show for a little bit, So it's about taking that time and being intentional and, seeing all of the opportunities that can be a learning opportunity for the families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really amazing. And I could see even how, your kids are still fairly young, but you could like graduate to like more complex discussions in the car and stuff. And like, even, you know, like, oh, you could do what's hot topics right now, what's going on in the news, if you had maybe like teenage kids and you're driving to school or something like that.
And it's a great opportunity to have that conversation, maybe those tricky conversations even, or what's going on in their life, you know, because how many times does someone say, oh, it was fine, my day was fine, but finding those questions that are actually going to have them open up and have that open line of communication. And it starts early, you know, having that communication saying, you know what, I'm here, like, please come to me, because if they don't come to you, who are they going to go to? Their friends? Well, you don't want that. You don't want them to have advice from their friends on those big things, right? You want them to be able to come with you. So keeping that line of communication is huge, and just really finding those ways to incorporate them throughout your day. You know, you ask, like, how can I incorporate my child? Well, my kids help me with the laundry. They help me making dinner. They help me, you know, cleaning the bathrooms. I mean, all the things that we as parents dread. But whenever you turn it into a game and you say, oh, who can clean their bathroom the fastest? Or who can, you know, do the laundry for me? And they're so excited about it. Now, I'm hoping that this continues, guys. My kids are only 5 and 7. So I'm hoping that this continues until they're 16 and beyond, right?
Right.
But right now they're excited. And, you know, I just want to keep building that excitement for them, you know, keep giving those opportunities and thank them. You know, that respect too, I think, is huge, where I am just saying, thank you so much for doing that laundry. I really appreciate it, you know? So it's not like a chore to them, but it's being helpful.
Yeah, totally. And I just had this like idea in my head, like I could see if I had kids and I would just be like, oh, go do this thing. And then now it's a chore, right? And they're like, okay. But, you know, and then especially my engineering brain, like I could bring him into the laundry room and we could be putting in the clothes and I could be like talking about, well, why do you think, how does the thing work? You know, like how does it spin around? What makes it work? What kind of motor does it have? You know, and just kind of engage them in that way. Because that would be fun for me too, is because I'm like an engineer at heart, and like, you know, I hopefully get my kids down that path as well.
Yes, that is so true, because that's what it's about too. It's about bringing our kids into what we enjoy too. You know, not only being a part of their world, and yeah, you want to go play Barbies or cars or whatever they're into at that time, but also getting them excited. I mean, my kids, they do videos with me weekly, you know, and they're excited about it. They love doing it, and they don't even realize they're doing work for me. You know, they're helping me do work, but they're excited about it. So, you know, teaching them about how it works and how motor works, you know, that's the science of it. There's the history you can teach them. You know, there's just so many things. We talked about President's Day, and we talked about the presidents, and then they wanted to know more. Well, why did this happen, and why did that happen? Well, let me open some books, let me get you know, a video for you. You know, it's really embracing that why question and their curiosity. Because when they stop asking those questions, you know, you just want that magic. You want to keep, I don't even want to think about them stop asking the questions, right? I want them to continue to ask the questions, and I want to continue to embrace it, because I want that magic and that love for learning to continue for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I know parents can sometimes probably get a little annoyed if it's like constant why, but I also believe, like you're saying, at the heart of learning, like, it's curiosity. And if people are curious, or kids in general are curious, then they're going to want to pursue to learn more about that particular information. But if they're not curious, then we try and force it on them. That's my experience in my classrooms. And you try and force math on kids that aren't curious about it, well, that's how you end up with kids that are like, oh, I hate math so much, and rebellious and all that stuff. So yeah, always trying to stoke that curiosity and build lifelong learners, I think, is so important.
Yes.
All right. So we talked a little bit about EduPlay, and I wanted to go deeper into like the multi-sensory aspect of all of that. So you mentioned that, like, you know, the kids have various learning styles, and I'm just wondering, what kind of learning styles do you notice kids tend to have? And then are there ways parents can kind of tell what learning style their kid is leaning towards?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the big ones that you have are visual. So your child is a visual learner where they are able to see information and they're able to absorb it that way. Or auditory, and they're able to hear it. So if they're hearing a lecture or something, they're able just to absorb the information that way and retain it. And kinesthetic. So kinesthetic is that movement, and they're able to get up and move. They want to move their body while they're learning. Those are your hands-on learners. So my approach, honestly, is to embrace all of those learners. We are, even when I do my homeschool for my children, we are going to be writing. We're going to be writing on the board, but we're going to be writing on paper, but we're also going to be using whiteboards.
Mhm.
And, so it's giving them the option and the ability to be able to learn by writing multiple different ways, and, they can write with a crayon and they're writing with a pencil and they're writing with a marker and they're, and the chalk. And so we are just giving them that opportunity to figure out, well, which way works best for you? I know for myself, I tried to switch to a digital planner. Okay. I was like, all right, I'm going to do this digital planning thing. I'm going to get with the times. I am not a digital planner person. I
Mm.
am a paper pencil kind of person, and it took me trial and error. And sometimes that's what we have to do. We have to try and approach out and realize, you know what? They're not really getting that. So let me try a different way. So that auditory learning is more the videos, so it's visual, but they're also able to listen to it. Maybe it's a podcast, maybe it is an educational video or a show, or even speaking, is that auditory learning. And then the kinesthetic is that movement. So, my kids, they just did a dice game today. And
Mm.
instead of just rolling the dice, my son is jumping around and throwing the dice around the room. And sometimes it's distracting, but most of all, it was what he needed at that moment. He needed to get up and move his body and not sit,
Mm.
while he was trying to do that assignment. And he did it. So for me, the goal was accomplished. He did what he needed to get done. And it didn't matter that he was up and moving around. So some of the ways that parents can do these are, one activity that came to my mind when I was saying about writing was like taking things outside. So when we go on a walk, I will ask them spelling words, or I will retell stories and ask questions about it. Or, if we're learning about specific numbers, we'll be finding those numbers. So there's your visual. Another opportunity outside is that movement. Obviously, outside, you have so many opportunities for movement. But a big thing is just sidewalk chalk and a sidewalk. Not only can they write the words down, I've done a sight word game where they write the words down and then they have to jump to the words, or they've created their own obstacle courses, or, so there's all of these different ways that your kids can really just figure out their learning style and, just kind of continue to embrace that for them, where my daughter, she is more artsy and crafts, and my son is more the engineer mindset. I mean, he is 5 years old and I am blown away by the things that he retains for me, but my daughter, when I'm doing her math, it's just not the same, and I had to come up with a way that made sense to her today. I had to do some movement or some tactical objects, or, and just some things that she can see. So that's more that visual, that arts and crafts. They're like, they're just very creative, and
Mhm.
finding the ways that learn best, or that they can learn best for their style.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because it just reminded me of my longest student actually when I first started working with her. Like, she didn't know who I was, so she didn't really fully trust me yet. So a lot of the times she would kind of zone out by doodling on my whiteboard.
Hmm.
And at first I just let her. And we'd spend like half the time just doodling and then the other half of the time doing math because she just like that was her creative outlet. And then I remember when we were practicing long division, she had this thing where like she'd create a story about, so like every time we wrote a number on top, she'd be like, all right, the 8's trying to break into the house and get into the 4 and like get the steal the diamond or whatever like that. And I was like, okay, so we're creating a story around long division. And I was like,
Right.
I never would have thought of it myself, but that's what made her comfortable and engaged with the material. And I guess we did something right because I'm still working with her today, 4 years later. So
Good
yeah,
job.
I think it's interesting, you just gotta sometimes, like as a teacher, I can't be so fixed on what do I expect, but rather like how can I engage and connect with this student in front of me.
Absolutely.
And personally, like I remember in college when I was like I'd purchase these $100 textbooks and then I wouldn't even open them. Like the cellophane would still be around them because I could go to like class and I'd listen to my professor. And as long as my professor was at least somewhat competent, I could understand the material and I never had to open the book. But so I made sure never to miss a class. Now there were other people that would skip class all the time and then they'd like read the textbook, but the textbook was always kind of like hard for me to understand. So I was
Hmm.
very much an auditory learner. I prefer to learn from people that know what they're talking about.
Yes.
So I was also curious. So as your kids get older and maybe you notice that they're leaning towards like one learning style more than the other, if they prefer, do you still create activities that are still multi-sensory and get them all the senses involved, or do you tend to focus on just like that one thing?
So I haven't necessarily reached that point with them yet, but in my experience with my classroom, I still taught them in all ways. So I still gave them direct instruction where that was me teaching. And sometimes it's in a smaller group, a group setting. So instead of a large classroom, they just needed that smaller setting. And that may be 3 to 5, but that may be 1 to 1. But then I also included those games and those activities. And so for me personally, I still think they still need all of the ways, because the way the world is, we still are going to need to write. We still are going to need to be able to, listen to a professor if they choose that route, or,
Mhm.
they're going to need to listen to a boss, or, so it's really continuing to develop those skills as they continue, but allowing them to, just like you're saying, like answer it in a way that makes sense for them, you know? And if making a story for long division makes sense, then that's what I'm gonna let you do. If you've learned the goal, like I'm saying, like the expectation here is to come with your answer. For me, how you get that answer, that's for you to figure out. What works, what method works best for you, and coming up with that same goal. Are they able to come up with the same answer? Great, and continue to move on. So continuing to enhance and strengthen all of those senses, I think is very, very important, because you never know what they're going to be exposed to or expected of later on in life.
So I really loved Christine's response right there about learning in multisensory ways instead of just focusing on a single way. It's basically learning how to learn in different ways. And I think that's so important because, like Christine was saying, sometimes maybe like for me, I was talking about how like I'm an auditory learner, right? And I'd prefer to go to class and listen to my professors talk, and that's how I got the information. Well, sometimes there may be just a book out there that's just like I have to read it, right? So there's no other option. There's no like video on it or someone giving a guest lecture on it. It's just in that book. And maybe it's not on audiobook yet, it's not on Audible. So I can't just listen to it. So I have to learn how to be able to read a book and gather information from that book, even if that's not my favorite like modality to personally learn from. So I think it's kind of interesting in schools how, when I hear my mom talk about it back then, it was like people were really strict and it was like, you learn this way and this is how you're supposed to learn it and this is how you're supposed to do it. And it's like my way or the highway. And now we're getting more into the current situation in schools. We're starting to swing to the other side, but sometimes I think maybe even to the extreme of we're trying to meet kids where they are, but we're becoming like overly accommodating, right? So we're not forcing kids to learn how to learn differently. We're just like changing everything so we can meet how they do things. And then that's great in a lot of ways because it's giving them accessibility. But in a lot of ways, if we don't ever help them to learn in other ways, well, then they just become complacent, and then they just sit in their laurels, and then they'll just be like, oh, well, everything will just be done for me and everything will be catered for me. And that's also something we don't want. So we don't want to be too strict. We don't want to always just be like, you have to learn it my way. We do want to meet kids where they are, but the other side of that coin is also once we meet them where they are, we get them to engage, we get them to trust us. Then we want to start drawing them and leading them into other directions where maybe they're not so comfortable, and getting them to build up their skills in that area so that they can learn how to learn in many different ways, so that they can access all types of knowledge and not just in their preferred mode. So I really loved how Christine was just talking about that, and how she doesn't, you like, ultimately, you try and raise your kids right, and then you don't know what's going to be expected of them in college, or when they get a job and their boss, or what will demand from them, like life will demand from them. So you want to prepare them for all possibilities. So we're going to get into the end of the interview here, and Christine's going to start sharing some wonderful resources that you can use to dive a little deeper into fun educational learning. So let's finish it up with Christine.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. And I think it is interesting, especially in math. There's a big focus on getting the answer. So like, I have so many kids that are like, all right, well, I'm like, what would you do first? And then they're like, I'll do this. And I'm like, okay. And then they're like, well, is that the right way? And I'm like, well, there is no right way. Like, it's like, whatever way you want to take is fine, as long as you get to the correct ending,
Mm-hmm.
So all ways are valid. And that's, I think sometimes kids get focused too much on getting the right answer rather than just like the journey and the process of, getting to the answer.
Absolutely. And that's something that I've taken personally in my own life, as you continue to grow a business, there's no right or wrong. Yeah, you want to keep getting that validation. Like, am I doing this right? Are we on the right track? But each piece of that is a learning experience. I've learned so much as I grow. Have I made mistakes? Sure. Could I have, taken out a lot of steps and done it an easier way? Probably. But I learned along the way, and it's gotten me to a point where like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to show the world what I have to offer. Or, we're ready to, our kids are ready to show us like, all right, now I have the right answer, or now I'm ready to move to the next step. So that's another thing too, also, is allowing our kids to know that those mistakes aren't failures. They're learning experiences, because I feel like as adults, that's something that we got to a point, oh, well, we failed. But really, I actually learned a lot, So I think that's a big thing too.
Yeah, I think that's really important to try and instill in kids early, because, a lot of times I get the kids, and they're so hesitant to even begin a problem because they're so terrified of looking stupid or dumb or being wrong. And I get it. Like, I get it because I was a perfectionist, and I still very much am in a lot of ways. I'm working on it. But I wouldn't do things unless I was 100% sure that I would be like right at the end, or I could still look smart, or, protect my ego. And that prevented me from doing a lot of things in my life early on, because I was too scared to actually step in and make the mistakes. So I think it is really important that the earlier you can teach the kids, like, mistakes are just, learning opportunities rather than failures, the better.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right. And the last thing I just wanted to talk to you about is, it sounds like you're really engaged with your kids. You seem to have pretty high expectations for their learning and their knowledge. And I'm just curious, like, why are high standards so important? And, especially like even your background in special education, like, why is it important to have high standards, even for kids that may be on like a special education track?
Absolutely. So when I taught special ed, this was before I had kids, I was teaching and I had a calendar sheet. And I said, okay, like what are some important skills for kids? Well, we should know what day of the week it is. We should know what month it is and the date. So I feel like that's a pretty important life skill. And that was something that I took this calendar sheet that I created and I said, okay, here we go. We're going to do this. And I had colleagues say to me, they're like, Christine, this is way too hard. I had parents say to me, like, they're never going to be able to do this. And I said, let's give them the opportunity to try. Let's let them show us what they can do. And I feel like that's a really good approach. Instead of limiting them by saying, oh, well, you're only in 3rd grade, you can't do that yet. Why? My son is 5, technically not even in kindergarten, and he is reading. I didn't limit him. I allowed him to show me what he could do. And that's the same thing that happened with those students. I gave them all the same piece of paper and I said, okay, this is calendar. This is how we do it. Show me what you can do. Some of them could write. Some of them needed things traced. Some of them needed multiple choice. So it was really finding how can they learn the skill of knowing the days of the week right now. And some of them needed different things. And it was really adapting that one piece of content and allowing them to continue to build their skills that way. Because now they're building their confidence. If I would have just given them that piece of paper and said, all of you have to write, you all have to write it, well, I'm going to have frustration. I'm going to have lack of confidence. They're not going to want to do it. Mm-hmm. But when I found what worked for them, it continued to build their confidence. So now, as they continue to learn and watch their colleagues or their peers watch me teach it, now they want to try it. Now they want to try to write it, and that was huge for me to see their growth, and I remember telling the parents that, like, okay, like this is where they're at right now, but let's see where they're at the end of the year. And they all said to me, Christine, like, look how far they've come. And I know, I'm going to cry because those were my children. This was before I had kids of my own. And my students were always my children. I poured everything into them and I would give them everything that I could. And that was something that was so important to me, to give them that confidence, make sure that they felt like they can do it and be proud of what they could do. So I continue that with my own children. I have high expectations, but I also remember that my son's only 5. Mm-hmm. And when he's trying to read and he comes to a word that is not his sight word or not a word family, and he's frustrated with himself, I said, buddy, like, remember, this is like a 1st grade book, like, please don't get frustrated with yourself, So it's really allowing them to show us what they can do and not limit them,
Yeah, I love that. Like, not setting limits, because I always say as a teacher, like, I always hold the belief that whatever I'm teaching my student, they can learn it. And that may or may not be true, but like, I feel like if I'm holding the belief that, oh, this kid can't get this, I'll never get it, then I'm going to teach them that way. And it's just going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I go into it, oh, this kid can learn whatever I'm teaching them, then I'm going to teach them like they can learn it. And maybe they learn it, maybe they don't, but I feel like that gives them the best opportunity to actually be able to get to where they need to go.
Yep.
All right. Amazing. So we're coming up to the end here. You've been dropping some amazing advice and knowledge. Thank you so much. And I'm just wondering, do you have any other resources like apps, books, websites that, parents can explore deeper into these subjects and topics?
Absolutely. So I have created my own curriculum, which it's a source of, activity sheets for the kids, the games. So that's the EduPlay Learning for sure. There's also a YouTube channel called Teaching Moments that goes along with that. And so that's where I feel I bring in those multisensory, because not only do we have that paper pencil, but there's also a video for them to be watching and see how we do it. And it allows the parents also to see, well, how can I teach this to my kids? So stay tuned. We got big things coming up for the EduPlay Learning curriculum, but that's the start of it right now. Another great source that my kids utilize a lot is PBS Kids. They have an app. They also have streaming, so shows, and their shows a lot of the times are very educational. So for me, that's really, really important. You know, they are watching Wildcrats, which is all about animals, and you know, they dive deep into the habitats and everything. And so many times they come to me and they're like, "Mom, did you know?" And I'm like, "Where did you learn that?" Like, so they're just absorbing that information, and that's something that's interesting to them, you know. But there's so many other shows on PBS Kids that is just really, really full of educational value. Another great resource is an Osmo, and that it is like a device that goes with an iPad. So it's allowing them to use tiles and cards and allows them to build words or math facts or shapes and writing. There's so many different things with that. So that's another resource that we use.
Awesome. I know I was a Sesame Street guy on PBS back in the day, so I learned a lot from that. And that Osmo thing, I feel like I've heard of that before. But anyway, I'll post all the links and resources that you mentioned in the description, if anyone wants to find out more about it. All right, Christine, and finally, you are obviously amazing. And if anyone wants to learn more about you or EduPlay or get engaged with you, where can they find you out on the web?
Absolutely. So everywhere is going to be EduPlay Learning, and that's Instagram, Facebook, as well as my website and YouTube. And also Momspiration 412. That's also, there's a website, there's Facebook groups, and also there's a YouTube channel. It's called The Christine Furman Show, actually. And that is where I interview a lot of resources for families as well, building that support system up for the moms and the families, just to remember that they're not alone on this journey, that they're doing an amazing job, and, you know, just giving that encouragement.
Awesome. Yeah. So everyone listening and watching, if you want to go check out Christine, go check out her Facebook group and get involved in the community.
Yes. Thank you so much, Greg. This was such an amazing opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll get to talk to you again soon.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. And finally, it is time for the wrap up recap. And I'd like to thank Christine again for coming on today. We talked a lot about having fun while learning, and not just having fun while learning, but actually like incorporating it into everyday life. So if you're doing chores around the house, you can always bring your kids along, ask them questions, get them engaged, get them thinking about how it works, and actually try and make it fun instead of just making it a chore. And we talked about how kids are always learning, and I think people are always learning. So you hold on to that idea. Don't forget that you could take time in your car when you're driving your kids to school or driving them around just to engage with them, talk with them, ask them questions, and help them learn the things that they need to learn. And we also talked about multi-sensory learning. So not everyone just is audio visual like we learn in school. So nowadays, typically we sit everyone in a classroom, teachers up at the board speaking, and a lot of times it's just lecturing, right? So it's like a lot of audio, maybe we play some videos, so it's visual. But there's a whole kinesthetic aspect too, right? Moving around, and especially younger kids, they need to have that movement. And as they get older, you really want to make sure that they can learn anywhere. So you want to work on all the senses so that they're able to watch a video, they're able to hear a lecture, they're able to read a book, and they can get information all of those different ways. And then finally, Christine talked about just having high standards. And this is something that I believe, like, it's okay to set the high standards. And then if the kids don't make it to those standards, then that's all right. But at least you had the standards in place. I mean, we're going to try and do everything we possibly can to get them to those standards and have those high expectations. But don't just set arbitrary limits. Don't just be like, oh, well, my kid's XYZ years old, so they can't do that. You know, let them go until they hit their own personal limit. So don't just set arbitrary limits just because. just let them expand into whatever their limits really truly are. So we had some really great learnings today, really great knowledge. And again, go check out Christine. She's really amazing. And I look forward to probably working with her again in the future. So once again, thank you for joining Pandemic Parenting. I love you all very much. Until next week.